Brothers. Kevin Crabtree pulled himself up to the third-floor landing of his Pitt Street walk-up, a slummy dwelling shared with a dozen struggling families and hundreds of rats living in the backyard. Sometimes the rats would venture in packs into the hallways, creating showdowns much dreaded by Kevin. He would put on his game face and charge them noisily with stomping feet, but his blood ran cold when he had to do it. A painter just past 30, Kevin was a middle-class guy dwelling in the edgy part of town. In this way, he could keep overhead down and life experience up. He'd been there a long time and liked it. Stumbling into the apartment, he stripped off his windbreaker and flung himself face first onto the bed. It had been a forgettable day, 6 hours behind the wheel to some town in the boondocks to contest a speeding ticket. The real punishment wasn't the money. It was the wasted time. He lay motionless on the bed with a face full of pillow, waiting for energy to trickle back in. The phone rang. Craving only stillness, he dragged himself to the wicker bowl on the kitchen table in which his cell rested. "Yeah? Son, it's Dad." "Hey, what's up?" "You sound tired." "Yeah," he drawled, stretching. "Been a long day up here. What's on your mind?" "Well, a news producer at WHYY Radio, Gene Crabtree, was not one to normally stutter or equivocate. "This isn't easy to say, but you have a half-brother I never told you about." It took a moment for the information to register. Kevin straightened in his chair. "Wow. Okay." His father had a way of dropping bombs. Somehow he was always in need of mending or compassion, despite a history of unavailability to others when the circumstances were reversed. The hypocrisy was glaring to his son. Kevin began sifting through questions crystallizing in his mind. Where to start? "And there's more than that," Gene continued. "You actually know him." The son's brow twisted. "Excuse me?" "Sorry to lay this on you." "Well, what the heck, Dad? What are you telling me here?" "It has to do with Ashira." "My old girlfriend?" He pulled the mental index card on his college ex and began scanning for relevance. He had pined for her from a distance at Haverford High. An elegant, earthy creature 2 years his junior, Ashira Chatov captivated him with her deep-set eyes, lithe frame, and creamy olive skin. Something about the way her rich brown hair fell to the shoulders accentuated a remarkably graceful jawline. Kevin couldn't understand why guys weren't tripping over themselves to get to her, yet somehow she remained off the social radar. No one seemed to know her. Perhaps the boys were a bit intimidated, as he was. Following graduation, he went to Temple University in downtown Philly, not far from home, but far enough. The allure of life in a cramped apartment with 2 other students on a bad block wore off quickly, though, so by springtime he was escaping home to Haverford frequently on weekends. On one such Sunday, he ran into Ashira at Community Park. "College man," she greeted a little goofily. "Big wheel on campus yet?" Her guileless smile read like an invitation. Pushing through reflexive reticence, Kevin summoned the warmth he'd always had for her, and they were off and running. The next 6 Sundays were spent together. Fridays and Saturdays were trickier for her at home, but Sundays were theirs. They would rendezvous in the park with no agenda, romance blooming au naturel in the deep woods on a gray woolen blanket Kevin kept in the hatch of his old Chevette. Her ripe, nubile body was even more sublime than he'd endlessly imagined. Every inch of her fragrant skin contained a secret to be discovered. She displayed a ready physicality previously unknown even to her. Luxuriating in his urgent attention, she opened herself entirely to his explorations, responding to his caresses with innate confidence. The intensity of their passion was novel to the young lovers. Talking about it, defining it, reveling in it became almost as exhilarating as the climaxes it generated. Elevating the drama further was an ominous obstacle. The disapproval, of her parents. Ben and Sarah Chatoff had lived quietly in the Haverford community for years. Their yard, always immaculate, was rarely seen in use. The Chatoffs didn't socialize much, and when they did, it usually involved Temple Beth, their synagogue. As a young man, Ben had done his 2-year service in the Israeli Air Force. Soon after, he met Sarah Berkowitz, a young Philadelphian visiting a kibbutz near Kinneret. Demure by Israeli standards, she fell hard enough to give herself to him entirely. When the time came to return to Philly, he accompanied her. 6 months later, they were married. Ben sought to make his own way in the world. Their ample Haverford home, forged on his blossoming career in finance, had remained half-empty through years of failed attempts to conceive. Medical tests eventually concluded that he was shooting blanks. Heartbroken but determined, Ben and Sarah adopted 2 infants of unwed teen mothers. First, a son they named Daniel, and then a few years later, Ashira. Thereafter, their house was filled with babble and bickering. Past 40 at this point, the parents cherished their hard-won progeny, but had passed the age of rediscovery through the eyes of children. They held the reins tightly, steering the kids into the only community they knew. Ashira had not been popular at Haverford High. As stunning as she was, she took no interest in prom, cheerleading, clothes, television, or any of the sacraments indispensable to her peers. Unadorned by makeup, her soulful eyes conveyed an inscrutable tone to her middle American classmates. Her family, known to keep to itself, was viewed as foreign and weird. They were reputed to follow a frightening political figure, the militant rabbi, Meir Kahane. Ashira had never looked the part to Kevin. Her turned-up nose and broad, chiseled cheekbones did not recall stereotypical Jewish features. He wondered who her birth parents may have been. An Apache warrior and bonny Irish maiden? Who knew? Her biological origin was a mystery, her beauty untraceable. First love with Kevin triggered her thirst for independence. She began a measured, silent rebellion, sneaking out when possible, picking and choosing escape opportunities with the precision of a guerrilla strategist. "No Havura tonight, Mama. I have to study at Brenda's. Big test tomorrow." Any guilt she felt about lying melted away in Kevin's arms. If her parents knew about him, they wouldn't rest until he'd been driven far away. Months of fulfillment, however, emboldened her. Bursting at the seams, she eventually declared her secession one night in a dramatic speech at the dinner table. "He wants to be an artist. He's creative and real and loves me for who I really am," she declared. "You can't pick my friends for me, Papa, and you can't tell me who to love. I decide who matters to me, and that includes Goyim." Ben slammed his fist on the table so hard, a bowl of stew perched at the edge skipped off onto the floor. The family's peace shattered with the bowl. The battle over Kevin would last for months. First, her parents threatened to pull her from Haverford and send her to finish in Israel, but it was too late in the school year for that. Attempted curfews proved fruitless. Her parents couldn't outlast her at night. She would wait until they fell asleep and then slip back out. Sarah soon developed chronic chest pains, for which Ashira felt responsible. But not even this ignominy could soften her defiance. She doggedly stuck to her guns, sometimes withholding information to minimize the skirmishes. One day she would brazenly announce she was going on a date. The next she would simply slip out the kitchen door after doing the dishes. If she planned to spend the night, a rarity given the potential backlash, she would arrange a backstory with Naomi, a fellow Temple Beth renegade who was dating an older jazz guitarist. Fooled by a little of it, Ben and Sarah felt powerless to corral her. The household had become an incubator of tension. Kevin was hurt by the Chatoffs' attitude. His feelings for their daughter were pure. He was a stand-up guy. How could they reject him on the basis of something beyond his control, his ethnicity? What about Ashira's wishes and needs? Didn't she have a say? He wallowed in the unfairness of it, but took vengeful satisfaction in stealing their daughter's heart. The standoff was maudlin and romantic. The couple became expert at clandestine sex, turning local playgrounds, mall parking lots, the Haverford High football field, and even Har Jehuda Cemetery into makeshift love nests. Ben and Sarah had cast themselves as the Capulets, stoking the young lovers' resolve to defy them. Kevin loved playing Romeo. Having grown up with Jean, he expected little from parents and questioned their authority. In taking a Shira, he was claiming something sacred that had long been denied. Unlike the hands-on Chatovs, Kevin's parents were uninvolved. Limping toward divorce, Jean and Emma Crabtree were too entangled in their own strife to trespass on Kevin's. It was typical of them. He kept Ashira away. The couple took to club hopping in Philly, tearing around like Bonnie and Clyde in the beat-up Chevette. Ashira's pudgy, chatty brother, Daniel, a little older than Kevin, furtively joined the rebellion, keen to hear bands, drink beer, and dial up his own social life. He tended to spray out thoughts as they entered his head, leaving little room for dialogue. Talking heads, you like that whiny nerd intellectual anti-stuff, don't you, Kevin? Well, not just, you can't romance a girl, he interrupted, mischievously casting his eyebrows in the direction of his sister, to that guy's voice. You need some Marvin Gaye, a little Motown to get things going, right? Well, apparently you don't know. I know no woman in the world wants a guy in a too big suit bleeding like a whiny goat. Having heard it all before, Ashira would avert her eyes, silently pining to be elsewhere. He had been her Sherpa to the secular world. She owed him tolerance. Kevin found him overbearing, but he was congenial and, importantly, complicit in the couple's defiance of her parents. One weekend, they absconded to Fenwick Island for an all-nighter at the beach with friends of Daniel's. Kevin brought an old tent, which he and Ashira filled with a night of audible, unbridled passion. In the midst of it, he wondered where Daniel might be sleeping. As usual, he hadn't paired off with anyone that night. It turned out he had spent the night holding court around the bonfire with a couple pals and random insomniac partiers wandering by. Yakking incessantly in pork pie hat and snug tank top barely covering his beer-logged belly, he turned up the radio here and there to drown out his sister's moans of pleasure emanating from the tent up the hill. The siblings tumbled out of the Chevette a block from home at noon the next day, sandy and disheveled with bloodshot eyes. Their parents were livid, especially with Daniel, for colluding in his sister's disobedience. In fact, the whole venture had been largely his idea. A handful of artist friends had been expected, and Daniel knew Kevin held aspirations to paint. From what he could see, Kevin had been treading water, uncommitted to a path beyond his sister. His aimlessness brought out Daniel's inner big brother. You have all kinds of potential, he'd coach, but need to decide what you want and take it as if it's already yours. That's the key to success in life, right, pal? It was hot air to Kevin, but he knew he meant well.